All right, Larry, you and I have spent a lot of time on this platform talking about adverse events and reporting and just calling some attention to some areas that may not be that well identified, especially amongst the professionals out there that may be reprocessing medical devices or in infection prevention and control positions out there. And so, one that we want to highlight today is the FDA recently published a report and has now publicized for the first time links or linking the use of a gastroscope to 3 patients who tested positive for a rare strain of antibiotic resistant E. coli. Can you tell us a little bit about this? And I want to talk also about some of the details and maybe what's missing and information that needs to continue to be evaluated or investigated.
All right, so this is a really good topic, and our listeners and viewers will really appreciate this. A manufacturer filed a report with the FDA, and it caught my attention for a number of reasons, but one was because it linked a gastroscope, which is an instrument used in the upper GI tract. It linked a gastroscope to 3 patients who tested positive for this unusual or rare type of E. coli. We don't know much more about it other than it's an antibiotic-resistant E. coli. And we're used to this in the world of duodenoscopes because of the complex nature and the design of those devices, but not so much with gastroscopes. We don't hear about that too much. So there's not many details in the report, so we don't really know what caused it. The hospital did say they cultured the endoscope and it came back negative. And the hospital, in the report, the manufacturer discloses that the hospital is not sure that the endoscope, the gastroscope, was actually the cause of this cluster, if you will, of these antibiotic-resistant E. coli organism. But there are a couple things I'd like to point out. In some work I've done in the past, listeners may be surprised to hear that if you look back over the last 8 years, gastroscopes, more than any other type of flexible endoscope, have been linked to more adverse reports describing contamination than any other type of endoscope, including duodenoscopes, and this is surprising. So what I'd like to emphasize today is that listeners are particularly aware of the FDA recently issuing safety alerts focusing on how reprocessed bronchoscopes, duodenoscopes, and urological endoscopes may remain contaminated and infect patients. So the FDA gave safety alerts and advised the public about that and provided recommendations. What I want to point out is understanding my review of the FDA's MAUDE database that has shown me a lot of concern with regard to gastroscopes. It may now be time for the federal agencies to consider issuing a similar type of alert to educate the public and healthcare providers and patients about the risk of gastroscopes too remaining contaminated with these multi-drug resistant organisms and exposing patients to these bugs that can have a mortality rate, if you're infected with them, can be as high as about 50%. So that's something that I'd like to highlight today, and soon in our next videos we'll talk more about risk factors for contamination of a gastroscope and recommendations to prevent a gastroscope from transmitting these life-threatening bugs.
Yeah, it's really important to make mention that an association or a link does not mean causality in the context of this conversation. And so I do want to remind everyone that that's why we're talking about further investigation, awareness, and education in this video.
And also to the point, in closing, is that MAUDE reports, those are FDA adverse event reports submitted to the FDA's database called the MAUDE database, that these can be incomplete, they're not verified, they haven't been independently reviewed, so the information can be incomplete and even according to the FDA biased. But these reports still are giving us very important information for trending and to understand where we should be focusing our attention to improve patient safety.